Isle of Wight Volunteer Stories is a podcast brought to you by the Isle of Wight Volunteer Centre, celebrating the wonderful contribution that volunteers make to island life. We'll be hearing about the different roles and activities that people do, what they get out of it, and what motivates them to start in the first place. Volunteers share some of the highs and lows of their lives, talk about the skills that they learn and the connections that they make on their volunteer journey. We hope this podcast will give you an insight into a world you may not be familiar with, will demonstrate that volunteers come from all walks of life, and perhaps it will inspire you to start your own volunteer story. I'm Sandy Cicognani from Community Action Isle of Wight, and I'll be your host on this podcast. In this episode, I meet Den Scott, a nurse and medical researcher who talks about volunteering in retirement and chasing sheep around Newtown Creek. Welcome, Den, and thank you for coming on this Isle of Wight Volunteer Stories podcast.
Oh, thank you very much for inviting us. It's an absolute pleasure to be here.
So, Den, can you tell me, just start by telling me where you volunteer and what you do?
Well, we're sitting in the tea rooms at Waterstone Manor, and I'm here because at the moment I am making some pretend stained glass windows. They're pretend stained glass because they're actually plastic with paint, but that's the idea. They look like stained glass. We previously have made the Isle of Wight 100 Years Celebratory Mosaic, which is sitting at Newtown Creek at the moment. And when I'm not here, I am frequently at Newtown Creek, sitting on a boat, helping collect the dues for the National Trust, which is lovely because it's such a wonderful nature reserve. Watching the seals and, if you're lucky, the sea eagle, and absolutely wonderful. Peace, calm, beautiful scenery, absolutely wonderful. And then when we're not doing that, we are frequently chasing sheep around, which...
We'll come on to that in a moment. Can I ask, what prompted you to sort of become a volunteer in the first place?
I don't know. When the children were very young, they had the passports that you go around and you get stamped at each place. And sort of jokingly, because I was terrified of retiring, and I said, I'm going to get myself a room and be a custodian in a room for the National Trust. So that was my idea. And then when we moved to the island, there's not an awful lot of National Trust large properties where I could be a custodian. But I play badminton, and I was talking to a very dear friend who's now walking the coastal path and would appreciate anyone getting into his link with him. And he said, I have this theory that there's an awful lot of there's a National Trust person, and they are all so enthusiastic about their subject. They make you feel as though you could do anything and you can be one of them, and they're all so wonderful. And he said, you like messing about in boats, and it's sort of, the conversations progressed countryside, so why don't you come and help us strip chestnut saplings with these sharp tools, pulling the bark off them. So I used to go, and any exciting to me that they were doing, even rolling up bales of old fencing, it was great. So I just got involved, not even once a week, but it was all so different to what I've ever done before, and I've always liked being in nature. So why I ended up doing the job I do, I don't know. But anyway, that's an aside. It's just wonderful learning about nature, and they're all so knowledgeable, fabulous people. They have this enthusiasm, and it really rubs off. And then you get all enthusiastic yourself, and it makes life really wonderful.
Excellent. Okay, and roughly sort of how long have you been volunteering with the National Trust?
Oh, probably 5 years. Yeah, maybe a bit more, 5.5. that sort of length of time, because we've only been on the island for just over 6 years. So.
And would you like to sort of tell me, what were you doing before? What sort of skills are you sort of bringing here as a volunteer? Two separate questions, sorry.
I'm not bringing any skills that I've previously employed, because I was a nurse and I did medical research for over 40 years. So nothing I've done previously is transferable. Apart from maybe pulling up the liquid in like a little syringe and squirting that out. That's about the only thing.
Thank you.
Maybe it's the difference between what I used to do to what I'm doing now that's half the fun.
Excellent. I was going to say, what is it that excites you about volunteering here, about the work that you're doing?
Yeah, it's coming into a lovely old building, it's looking at all the fabulous plants around here, and just being a part of it, even though the part of it that I am at the moment is pouring paint onto a bit of perspex. And everyone is so enthusiastic about it as well, and that really does give you a buzz. Get people walking in saying, "Oh, isn't that wonderful?" And you think, "Oh, is it?" I was thinking I'm a bit of a bodger, and here we are. Yeah, but it is absolutely wonderful.
Thank you. And what was I going to ask you next? I've lost my thread. Hang on. I was going to say, have you got any particularly memorable moments from volunteering?
Well, it might be when we were making the mosaic and we had spent about 60 hours sticking these little broken up bits of glass onto this big piece of hardboard, and then Dee said, "Well, you've got to grout it," and we looked at each other in horror and thought, it's going to look awful if we grout it. That was quite memorable. We thought we'd concealed our anguish about it quite well, but Dee has just said that she knew we were quite grumpy volunteers at that point.
I was going to say, Dee did say that she'd like you to be completely honest and let us know if are there any downsides to volunteering?
I can't think of one. I suppose you could say that being out in the cold and the wet and the wind when you're trying to find 10 lost sheep is a bit of a downside, but how often does that happen? Even in the winter here, it seems to be that the rain will suddenly stop magically when you go out to look for the sheep. So there aren't, I can't think of any downsides.
Tell me more about the sheep.
Oh, well, the sheep, which are funnily enough all black because they are Hebrideans, and the National Trust use them to maintain the shrub or keep the shrub down, basically. So they will eat anything. They're very hardy. They don't need an awful lot of looking after. They do tend to look after themselves. We just go once a day, so it's once a day at the weekend, or we were looking after the ones at freshwater golf course, and we'd go on a Wednesday just to make sure that somebody was giving eye, because the golf course were also looking after them. And it's just to go and make sure that they're all still alive. Now there was a worrying, yes, if there was a downside, it was walking into a field and only counting 11 sheep, spending half an hour searching for the 12th sheep and coming across a very still, inert form and thinking, oh my God, now what do I do? We've had one die. And as I got near to it, it suddenly leapt up with real irritation at having to move and ran off. So yeah, we've never discovered a dead sheep yet.
Excellent. Anything else you'd like to say about volunteering, or that you would like to say to encourage people to consider volunteering?
Go for it. My husband is very much, he likes to do the crossword in his paper, and if given direction he will do the cleaning, and he also likes cooking. But I kept thinking he must be getting a bit bored. Surely, why do you not come to Newtown Creek with me? It's very nice. Didn't really go down very well. Why don't you come? Well, he does come and look after the sheep with me, and that started to get him hooked. So it was well, now you're looking after the sheep all the time, you do really need to become a proper approved volunteer. And it was sitting in, well, I let him say that, but now he is an approved volunteer and he loves it. It's totally changed him. Doing these things, the basic thing is, once you retire, you've got very little conversation. You can't talk about work, nobody wants to know what's wrong with you, what else is there to talk about? Weather, yeah, well, that's a limiting source of conversation, isn't it, really? So go volunteering, because it will give you masses to talk about, and it's so interesting.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dad, for being a volunteer. Thank you for coming on the podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure.
It's been my pleasure, and thank you very much for asking me. I have thoroughly enjoyed it.
If you would like to find out more about how to volunteer, or if you're an organisation looking for volunteers on the Isle of Wight, please go to our website www.iwvolunteer.org or email us on volunteer@actioniw.org.uk.